very real issue at stake here, a couple of very real issues. We're going to give the left its due. So the first issue is the pervasive reality of the unequal distribution of both talent and wealth. And so Marx famously noted that capital tended to accumulate in the hands of fewer and fewer people as time went on. Now, the cataclysmic mistake that Marx made, one of many, was to assume that there was something unique about capitalism in the production of inequality. And there's much more thorough work done now on all sorts of theoretical fronts, ranging from physics to economics, demonstrating that that proclivity of resource, let's say, or even substance for that matter, to be unequally distributed is extremely pervasive. And so, for example, it is the case that most of the world's capital is in the hands of a relatively few people. But it's also the case that most of the world's water flows through a very small number of rivers, and that most of the world's population lives in a very small number of cities, and that very few planets have almost all the planetary mass. That also applies to stars. It applies to your blood vessels as well. A very small proportion of your blood vessels have the largest volume of flow. That's called a Pareto distribution, and Pareto distributions tend to characterize a certain proportion of natural systems. And so this proclivity for inequality to emerge is real, and the danger that capital will accumulate in the hands of a very small number of people is also real. But number one, it can't be attributed to capitalism, because every economic system that humans have ever employed produces a Pareto distribution. Now, but the problem there is that if you're a young person and maybe you're looking for a romantic adventure and you see inequality, it's going to grate on you emotionally, because who the hell is happy about the fact that there are disenfranchised street people, and then also people who are even perhaps, with a street person, you might say, well, you've made some bad life choices, but what do you say about poverty-stricken children, especially when they're poverty-stricken in the face of wealth? And so the idea that you're fighting on behalf of the oppressed is a pretty attractive proposition for a young person, even if they're not ideologically addled, right? And it's also a reality that makes conservatives guilty when they're faced with the moral onslaught of leftist activists, because, well, inequality is a painful reality. And the truth of the matter is we really don't know what to do about it. It's a very difficult problem to solve. And it's a complex, the solutions are complex. This is a very big problem.
Yeah, and I'll tell you kind of how my views changed. And really my views changed significantly when I spent 5 years actually working on a documentary for PBS, looking at 3 forgotten American cities: Youngstown, Ohio, Memphis, Tennessee, and Stockton, California. I followed these families in some of the poorest zip codes in the country, a white neighborhood, a predominantly black neighborhood, and a predominantly Latino and mixed race neighborhood over the course of a few years, and really trying to understand this question. What is driving inequality? What does inequality look like? What does the phenomenon reveal about itself? And the answer was actually really my political turning point, the completion of my political education. And it's looking at it and saying, hey, wait a minute. It's not just a simple economic story. It's not a story of elites, kind of greed. It's not a story of that kind of left-wing ideology. And in fact, the fundamental human experience of inequality in America, in a kind of advanced industrial country, is one that actually is a complex social story. You have broken families. In one of the neighborhoods, for example, 92% of the families were single-parent homes. So there were no fathers in the home almost anywhere in the whole zip code. You look at the social pathologies. And then you look at the collapse of community institutions. So those mediating social institutions that once provided a structure, a sense of meaning, a sense of restraint, a sense of direction, they've all been evaporated. And all you get is the individual and the state. And the ultimate irony that I discovered was that in a place like Memphis, they're spending, I believe, something like $3 billion a year on means-tested anti-poverty programs for a small population, something around $30,000 per family per year, so enough to have a median standard of living, and yet you have a complete social disaster through and through. And so what that taught me was you have to look at the society, you have to look at cultural factors and kind of economic redistribution, which we already have in this country. The United States spends more than $1 trillion a year on its welfare programs. It cannot solve problems that are human, cultural, spiritual in nature. And so at that point, the left-wing narrative on inequality, those simple story, I mean, just could not meet the standard of reality that I saw and lived with.